So my name is Menachem Moshelion. I'm a professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and I'm a plant physiologist. So my main study is water relations. In particular, I study aquaporin, which is the molecular level of water control. But today I want to present to you a bit of a different system. Our phenotyping system is not based on any imaging. We just monitor physiological aspect of the plant. And moreover, we're not just monitoring points in time, but we measure the dynamic of the plant response to the environment, to its soil environment and atmospheric environment. So you might say we measure the kinetics of the plant response to the environment, and we do it based on comparison of as many plants as possible. So to those of you that are less familiar with the plant-water relations, so I'm going to give you a brief introduction that will help you go through to my next explanation, because I'm mainly going to talk today about plant-water relation. So it mainly involves stresses, abiotic stresses like drought and salinity. One of my main expertise is drought behavior of a plant, how plant responds to drought. So plant's water content in general is about 90% of water. So I think it's fairly to say that you can compare plant to water tank. Now, as soon as at night, when stomata is closed, plants do not transpire water or almost do not transpire water, and this volume of water is maintained. But as soon as they start, stomata is open, water being lost and CO2 actually enter via the stomata to the plant. So we can say that the relation between the water loss and the CO2 absorption is about 500 to 1. I'm talking about crops. In my talk, I will mainly talk about crops. So this is a huge water loss per CO2 gain. So we can call this water use efficiency or molecular water use efficiency, the ratio between water loss and CO2 gain. So the driving force for this water out of the plants is actually come from the atmosphere. So the differences between water potential in the soil and water potential in the atmosphere are huge. It could reach to minus 95 megapascal. It's huge power. This power can easily lift water to 100 meters without any investment of energy for the plant. So the plant just opens stomata and water just pump right up. Another thing, and most of the water just transpire to the atmosphere with actually just passing the plant with no, they do not stay in the plant. So another thing that is very important to remember, that water outflux from the plant, from the leaf area, is much greater than the water influx. So in fact, during the day, plant loses water content, reduce water potential, and if they want close stomata, they actually desiccate. So plant will close stomata sooner or later, and now this is a very important prospect of the plant. Some plants are very careful and they close stomata very early when they sense this water potential reduction, while other plants continue transpiring water and lose more and more. The advantage of, and the other one termed anisoidric. I'm going to repeat this term, so remember, isoidic are non-risk takers, and isoidic take the risk. So many of the crop plants, this is sunflower, but also tobacco, many of the cucurbitacea are anisoidric. So you see them losing turgor during the day, but you must remember this plant is actually 95 functional if you take, for instance, its photosynthesis. So if this plant is fully functional, it's only lose some turgor. So to summarize up, isoidic plants are non-risk taker. They more protective against drought, but they are less productive. So they produce less because they close stomata, while anisoidic plants are risk taker. They lose more water, but at the same time, they are very productive. So actually, we published a few years ago that anisoidric are also more tolerant to mild to moderate stress because they take the risk Many times, if the stress is not too harsh, they can actually produce more compared to plants that closed stomata earlier. Now, I gave this long introduction for a simple reason. If now we look for a drought-tolerant plant, morphological, so for example, I take this basil and expose it to drought, I can get two kinds of morphology, this kind and this one. Many of us will call this drought tolerance, but usually this is a mistake. Crops that maintain their water are actually do not do photosynthesis. So this is more drought survival strategy and not drought tolerance in the point of view of agriculture, of crop production. And this is very important to remember. If we talk about crops, we want them to produce, not to survive. So if we look at this and say, okay, this is sensitive, you must remember it's look poor because it produces, because it loses more water, it did more photosynthesis. This plant's doing 95 photosynthesis. So maybe these are mild to moderate drought tolerant. So I'm just saying that image is not enough. You can look at the plants and get to the wrong conclusion. And this is why we came to the conclusion that physiological characteristics are much more important. So when you phenotype for physiological characteristics, there are many challenges. And I want to go through with you today about these challenges just to explain you our approach of screening for these stresses. So the main challenges is the atmospheric and the soil condition. If you ask yourself, why do the plants look like that? So many will say, okay, because it doesn't have enough water in the soil. But the real reason it looked like that, because the atmosphere pumped away its water, and the soil could not compensate it back. So you must remember, we talk about a balance, like a bank account. There are incomes and outcomes, and we always have to remember that just losing water, it's not enough. We have to always ask ourselves, what is the income? What is the input of water? So atmospheric is very important because, as I said before, atmospheric is actually this gradient of potential. This is actually the driving force, and we call it VPD, vapor pressure deficit. This is also a very important term because the VPD is actually what pumps water up. And in fact, this power is so strong, it's like putting a vacuum on the plant and pumping the water out of it. So plants respond to VPD very quickly. So in fact, if we look on the daily changes in VPD, these are 6 days on the road, the gray line is the VPD change, so we see two things. This is natural VPD, not greenhouse controlled. So first of all, you can see difference between 2 days. Look at the peak here and the peak here. So different days have different VPD, so plants will respond to it. But even more importantly, in the same day, so between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m., there is a huge difference in VPD. So plants actually facing a very different environment, much more stressful environment. Some people call VPD drought stress of the atmosphere, because this is actually what dries the plants out. If you put a plant in 100% humidity and you dry the soil totally, it will be okay. But if you reduce the relative humidity of the atmosphere, only then it's going to dry away. So you must remember this VPD is a very important, and almost nobody put attention while screening to this important factor. So how do plants respond to the VPD? I take this from the literature. This is paper by Broderick and Holbrook. This is a normal day fluctuation of stomatal conductance. You can see here stomata is open and then reduce a bit. And this is the daily change of VPD. So stomata responding to this VPD change. So what you see here is between 7 and 8, there is 100% increase in stomatal conductance. Okay? In 1 hour, 100% increase. Then VPD reaches peak, and stomata start to close down. Otherwise, the leaf will desiccate, because remember, water outflux from the leaf is faster than water influx. So plant responds very quickly to these changes. And again, between 8 and 9, there is 50% reduction. So it's a very dynamic process. So 1 point a day, 2 points a day are not enough. You have to have many sampling points a day just to get this pattern of response. If you take the same plant and this time look at different, on the wet season when the VPD is very low, you can see stomata reach much higher conductance and keep it high. So we can say that the plant responds to its daily environment, and this is unstressed plant. These are well-irrigated plant. What you see here is just a response to the atmosphere. And remember, the isoedic and anisoedic also have a different response to these atmospheric changes. So when we talk about functional physiological phenotyping, the system I'm going to describe you now, when we build this system, we had in mind a system that we want to monitor each plant separately. So instead of bringing all the plants to a central hub or take the hub and take pictures, hold the plant in the greenhouse, we wanted a system that will look much more like this. So put as many as possible probe on a plant, but also control its stress level. So we can make it faster, slower, more dry, less dry. And this is exactly what we build. We build a system that actually controls the plant, each plant in the greenhouse, water content, salinity content, nutrient, and compare all the plants based on the same environment, based on the same atmosphere. So basically, each plant is sitting on a lysimeter, gravimetric system, has soil probe, at least one, but it can go up to 4, and VPD, light and temperature measurement of the air. So actually, each plant, we take each plant like a resistor, like electric resistor, and we try to divide the different probes in order to get the resistance, or vice versa, the conductance of the plant. And if we do it accurately, and I think we do, and I will show it first, we can actually separate between the 3 resistors of the soil, the plant, and the leaf, and actually get different physiological measurement. Moreover, this is a feedback system, so we have a controller that actually regulates, based on each plant response, regulates its soil water condition. So we can actually take the whole greenhouse. Each plant is now hooked to 3 sensors and can be automatically regulated by our controller. This is the commercial one. This is a new company going to be out very soon, Israeli company, Plant-Ditech. But the controller actually has 2 valves. Each of them regulate different irrigation solution. So with 2 valves and a special irrigation system that allows a very homogeneous filtration of the soil or irrigation of the soil, we in fact can have each one of the plants having different soil conditions, but not just having them like a normal system when you irrigate 300, but after 2 hours it's becoming 500 because the plant transpires water. This system also maintaining this. So the feedback with the probe actually keeps this condition throughout the experiment. So we can say that this experiment is very controlled because you must remember, pots are relatively small and the plant transpires a lot. Plant can transpire its own weight per day. So plant that weight 500 grams can lose 500 ml per day, okay? So you must remember these conditions are very dynamic and highly changed. This is why this controller is very important when you want to measure for abiotic stress. So what are the principles? What drives us to build this system? So first of all, we want all the plants to see the same environment. We want actually to have a non-controlled greenhouse because we want to have the daily fluctuation. We want to have the day light change because we take this system as a pre-breeding system, as a pre-field system. So here we want to select the plants that could really survive the stress outside. So by comparing all the plants on the same greenhouse without any control of the environment, we actually get the fluctuation that we're looking for. The fact that we measure physiological parameters means that we don't need a specific algorithm for each. It's not like image analysis that you have to recognize a shape. Here we measure transpiration, biomass gain, very simple or relative simple measurement that any plant has, and soon I'm going to show you some results. High capacity. So as you can see, we can put in a greenhouse as much as possible plants. These are more real to the field. So in the field, plants are condensed. In commercial greenhouse, plants are condensed. They're touching one another. And this is exactly what we wanted. We wanted to have a system that you can measure the plant, but also allow them to be like in the real condition where they're going to be one day commercial. Moreover, we want to have a large variation of pot size. So we can go from 1 liter to 40 liter and even more. I mean, if we can find bigger buckets, it will work. The 1 liter allows us to work with a single plant. So this is very nice for population characterization. And the bigger bots allow us, we call it mini plot. So we can actually put 4, 5, even more plants together and watch how when they grow together and probably interact one with the other. So this is the variety. We want high sampling or high sampling frequency. So actually, each probe is monitored about 500 times per day. This is the only way to really get the differences in the soil water content, in the atmospheric temperature, in the light. So you know that light is changing very fast. Humidity is changing very fast. So we want to monitor the plants faster than the changes in the environment. This is the only way we can really measure the plant response to the environment. And you all know, light changing very fast, temperature changing very fast during each day. And we also want to have quantitative decision assistant tools. I will talk about it a bit later. So what do we measure? We know to measure daily biomass gain, daily water loss, and daily transpiration rate. And I insist about the word rate because we take 500 measurements per day, so we can actually measure the rate or the rate changes between the points. So we can see the impact based on a minute resolution. We can also calculate stomatal conductance, root performance. This is a very new trait, which is, I think, very important. Relative water content, all of this done on the whole plant. So it's not a piece of leaf, it's the whole plant measurement. We also measure resilience. Resilience is actually the recovery of the plant. So after we put it on a certain stress for a certain time, we usually wash it back or bring the water back and then measure how much time the plant needs to get back to its previous conditions or its previous measurements. And obviously, you can make any kind of index using these measurements. So I want to give you some data. So what we did to test what I'm going to show you now, we used the introgression lines. This is of Danny Zamir's, Professor Zamir's. Actually, he's my neighbor, so he's just 2 floors above me in my institute. So we take his collection of it's called IL population of tomato, which is cross between the wild-type Pinelli and M82, which is a cultivated line. And in between, you get more than 70 introgression lines. So each of these lines is exactly like the mother, which is M82, only with small fraction of the Pinelli. This makes a nice variety, and if you find a variety, you know where to relate it to. It's this piece of foreign DNA that you have inside. So this is raw data. Even from the raw data, you can already learn a lot. So this is the atmospheric changes, light and VPD. You can see the difference between the days, and it's okay. We measure for several days, so we have all kinds of differences. It's very important to us. You can see this is irrigation peaks, and this reduction is daily water loss. The slope here is actually plant growth. So we can take, using the lysimeter and the special apparatus that we have, the irrigation system, the daily biomass gain only by weighing it. So we get the whole plant biomass gain, and the ratio between the biomass gain and the water loss this is actually water use efficiency. Now, we can see the different responses. This is much more isohydric than this one. So just by looking at this graph, you can already see differences between the plant behavior. You can obviously summarize this, average this to plant growth rate or plant water loss. You can follow what happened because we have a soil probe for each one, so we can actually follow and see. This is the Pinelli compared to the M82, so the father compared to the mother. Soon I'm going to show you the all introgression lines. So we can follow and see that the cultivated line take much faster the water from the soil. So you see, this is the wild type water loss, soil water content, sorry. This is the wild type soil water content, and this is the cultivated soil water content. You see how fast the cultivated line takes the water from the soil. What is nice that the ratio between these two, the slope here, which is the ratio between the weight and the water, the slope is actually water use efficiency. As steeper the slope, more efficient the plant is, which means it takes less water for more biomass gain. And obviously, since we know the plant transpiration and biomass gain at each soil water content, we can actually measure the transpiration based on the soil water content, not based on the day. not on time. We always compare the plant based on the real conditions that they're facing. Now, this is a screening approach. So here we just compare all the plants, all the IA lines, and you can clearly see the Pinelli is very small compared to the M82. The white one is MP1, is another cultivated line. And all the rest of the IA lines are spread in between. If we take the daily transpiration, again, the Pinelli, the wild type, is very small, doesn't transpire a lot, while the wild type transpire much more, and the MP1 even greater. But these are not normalized data. So smaller plant obviously will transpire less. What we want to do is to normalize the plants. Since we know the biomass, we can easily normalize the plants. And since we know the VPD, we can also normalize to VPD. And this is, it's not the full way, but this is how to calculate stomatal conductance by dividing the water loss rate in the demand, which is the VPD. When you do this normalization, this is stomatal conductance, again, you see Pinelli very low stomatal conductance, M82 somewhere in the middle. But now let's look about some other lines. For example, this line, 6.2 and 6.2.2. Both of these are very small and don't transpire a lot. But as soon as you normalize this plant to their size, look what happens. They move all the way here. You see 6.2.2 and 6.2. So what happened with these lines? How can it be that they are small and doesn't transpire a lot in absolute value, but when you normalize the plant, you get this very strange behavior of very high stomatal conductance. So this is the only image I'm going to show you. So we just went and took pictures. So this is 6.2 and this is 6.2.2, and this is the M82. You see both of these plants, they are very close in the genome point of view. Both of them have a wilty phenotype. So probably we're guessing that they have some kind of ABA malfunctioning, either insensitivity or non-productive, but the stomata of these cells is widely open, which makes them lose too much water and lose turgor, but it's too much loss, so they just cannot grow. So they remain very small, but relative to their size, they transpire a lot. So if I summarize up this, so we look on the plant atmosphere condition. This is what the plant feels in light and VPD. On the plant transpiration, so this is just water loss. On the soil probe, but this is very interesting. What we see here, this is transpiration rate. Actually, the area below this graph, this is the amount of water each plant loses. And the bottom graph, I think this is the most interesting one. This is stomatal conductance on the whole plant, and what you see here is average on several plants in the greenhouse. So in this array we build, we have several repetitions, and we just randomize, of course, and we just average them. So what you see here is the exact same pattern I showed you before, only this time we can do it on hundreds of plants simultaneously. So we get daily stomatal conductance between the plants. Now, if you look again, this graph I showed before, the difference between these 2 days, look how nice the plant responds to this difference. It's the same plants, just day after day, a bit of increase in VPD, and look how much water the plant loses. This is how important it is to monitor the environment. Another very interesting thing, we don't look on the day because this plant transpires more than this one. So obviously, after a few days, it will have less water in the soil. So it's much more important to control the soil water content than to control the day. So we compare them based, so this is transpiration based on soil water content. And this is another important point. This is called the critical point. At this point, the plant stops transpiring as it used to because water content in the soil is just going and reducing. At this point, the soil cannot support the plant transpiration anymore. So we have to reduce transpiration. This is a very important point because using this point, we can actually calculate the root activity of the plants or the root performance, because a bigger root or more efficient root will actually pump more water and push the way outside, push this point a bit more to the right. If we take the same plants, this time measure them in the winter, both the absolute value reduce and the critical point changes. So these are, again, very, very dynamic points. This is one of the nicest things that you can take out of the system. We know to separate the different probes. So actually, we can follow separately after the roots performance, in our case, water fluxes, and the shoot performance. So what you see here in gray is the root water flux, and in black is the all plant transpiration. They should have been behaved the same, right? Because it's water loss, but no. They do not behave the same. And these differences actually show you what I explained before. The root is always following the shoot. So first, the shoot start to transpire, and only then the root compensate, and only about afternoon and evening, the root can supply enough water to allow the plants to get back to its original relative water content and continue growing. So this is a very nice way to do a physiological phenotyping of the roots. We don't know how they look like, but we measure how they behave. And I think, for physiological point of view, this is even more important than the structure of the root. So I'm going to use a few more minutes to talk about our approach to translate the data into practice. So we talk about where to phenotype, when, and what to phenotype. In my approach is the physiological point of view. But how to translate the data to knowledge, this is, well, the million-dollar question. When we talk about practical tools, we want them to have a decision assistant. So we want our tools to help us decide which plant to choose, which treatment is efficient. So it must give us a very efficient data and very fast. So what we actually develop, this is also the commercial line, but always based on our algorithms. So if this is my blocking status of the greenhouse, now I focus only on one block. This is relative daily transpiration. So if I can have a color code of each plant transpiration, in fact, I can make optimization curve because I can change online the condition, for example, add more nutrient or reduce the nutrient, and each time select by very easy shift of button only the plant that are sitting in a frame that really interests me. So I can actually make online decisions. I can do optimization. Don't need to wait to the experiment to finish and then get to decision. I can do it online, change it day by day, and this is exactly what we are doing. We measure for day 2, change the condition, measure the new condition again, and compare them to the previous one. So this online, real-time, I would say not online, but real-time data analysis is very important when you try to make optimization of your plants, of your condition, sorry. Lastly, I want to talk to you about another strategy that we develop to follow the plants. So usually we talk about traits, height, length, whatever. I think that if you measure plant response to the environment, what you really want to measure is the plant response, not single point, not even the whole day, but how the plants respond and what is the difference in the response curve of plants. So for example, if we take stomatal conductance, which have a very high relevance to yield, and we can control the condition to have optimal condition and then drought and then recovery, we can actually follow a typical plant, expose it to drought to see how much transpiration or how much stomatal conductance the plant reduces, and then measure the resilience. This is the resilience. Now, if the plant does not go back to its previous point, this is actually the yield penalty or yield penalty predictor, because this experiment is only 3 weeks. Now we can compare it to other plants. For example, resistant plants is not so much interesting because probably resistant plant is a plant that from beginning doesn't transpire too much. And we can compare it to tolerant plants, which the yield penalty will be much low. But the idea is a comparative analysis. So you compare them based on the trait that you measure. And in the end, what you actually get is a behavioral phenotyping. So I'm not going to get too much to details because this was just published, just accepted this theory. What you can do with a feedback system, you can actually control any kind of scenario you wish. You can make prolonged drought and compare the plants, or even terminal drought and compare the plants. For each drought, for each treatment, you're going to select different traits and different plants. So in summary, I talk about the challenge, which is basically the environment dynamic conditions. I talk about the functional phenotyping. Why is it so important from my point of view to follow water relation and physiological traits? I also talk about, I didn't talk about it, but I want to emphasize the correlation to the field. In fact, our system have very nice result in correlation to breeders and field yield. This is the first paper here that was published several years ago. All of these papers were involved using the system, the prototype system in our faculty. So we have a lot of experience. It's more than 10 years that we developed this system. Now we even build a very nice facility. Last year I was here and I showed you just the infrastructure of now this greenhouse is actually functioning, and we have our 151st lease images set. And I invite you all to just call me if you want to collaborate. I will be very happy. And obviously, last and not least, thanking Professor Ronnie Volach. Is my partner for all this year. Ronnie Volach has actually developed the system with me. He's a soil scientist working in the same faculty with me. And all the students and technicians that during the last 10 years actually put a lot of time and effort and many PhD theses just to develop the algorithm I just showed you a taste of. And obviously they found the DFG, the Israeli Ministry of Science, and the Israeli JNF, which actually without their funding I could not do any of this. And thank you.